We are trying to go back and talk about some of the themes that we've been covering over the past couple of days. So just as a starting note, to begin with, the title of the presentation has changed. Initially, our title was, you're looking at structures that make work possible on platforms, but we have refined that concept a little bit. And specifically in this presentation, I'm going to be looking at off-platform networks. And how do they structure? In fact, I would argue they support the platform society. So by taking a look at gig work during the COVID-19 pandemic, we are trying to look at the roles and functions of these off-platform networks. My presentation today is based on work that I've been doing with a PhD student at IIT Kanpur, the very talented Rajoshi Ray. Apart from that, I will also be drawing on other work that I've been doing on platforms with other collaborators, including our very own Pier Giorgio and Brian, all of whom are here. Okay, so let's get started. So I suppose, we can start at a familiar place with platforms and take a look at the argument made by Van Dyck, who really challenged this idea that platforms are disruptors of markets. So they ask the question, what are platforms disrupting? And can we really realistically expect that platforms revolutionize? And they argue that platforms do not revolutionize. In my presentation today, I actually want to go back to the arguments that were presented by Giovanni on the first day, where he argued that if we have to truly understand how platforms work, rather than looking at universal models, we need to look at what are the structures and systems in specific countries and places. So that's very much the vein in which I'm going to be continuing today. Okay. So we know that in the platform literature, there is a huge discussion on what happens to risks that are generated as part of the operations of platforms. And the argument is that these risks that are created are either externalized to workers or contractors, or to customers, or even to the public. Okay. And the question that came to my mind was that in the context of a country like India, where citizenship has always been partial and unassured, how are these risks being addressed? So where is the burden of these risks actually falling? So we actually try to look at this question through the prism of a case of gig work. What is gig work? In gig work, workers are engaged in platforms, through platforms, but the services that they provide are provided offline. Okay. Typically, this is work that you will find in urban areas in India, but there are some very interesting backlinks to rural areas and circuits between the urban and the rural when we look at gig work in India. We also use the term work with a certain degree of caution, because as we are actually arguing in a paper, Rajoshi and I, with Sriram Venkatraman, this is actually micro-entrepreneurial work. So it's better described as micro-entrepreneurial activity, and the term work is a little loaded. But for today's purposes, we are going to go with work. So the literature tells us that gig work through platforms is disruptive because it creates flexibility in the ability to do work. It lowers barriers to entry to various markets. We also know that platform work, or particularly specifically, of course, gig work, is characterized by low wages, risky work conditions, and increased surveillance. Now, we must understand, or at least keep in mind, the context in which this kind of gig work is emerging, which is very much the neoliberal framework. We know that, these are observations that come to us from economic sociology, which argues that service work within the neoliberal framework is characterized by what they call a neoliberal subjectivity, which means that here the way to deal with risks that are being generated as part of the operations of service work or platform work is to take them up on an individual basis. Do not look to the state for help. Okay. Ooh, sorry. Let me see how to negotiate this. Okay. So let's take a moment to look at how is work happening in the pandemic. We know that the pandemic has generated, of course, both a medical crisis as well as a crisis of inequality, increasing precarity, and a lack of opportunities. In India specifically, it is working class livelihoods that have been especially hit because of the pandemic. When the pandemic started, India went through a 68-day national lockdown. And during this period, we saw that migrant workers actually returned to their villages from the cities, and others who stayed on in the city actually experienced a lot of distress because of that decision. We are referring to migrant workers here because the specific gig workers that we interacted with, we found that there were many migrant workers amongst them. Okay. We also know globally that because of the pandemic, the already deteriorating conditions of work and incomes in gig work became heightened. So problems of appropriation of surplus data, algorithmic surveillance, extreme work conditions, all of these actually became worse with the pandemic. We also have evidence from New York, where Ravanelli found that because gig work was shrinking or reducing during the pandemic, individual gig workers started to what they call hustle, which means that they felt it was their responsibility to cope with the situation and avoid turning to the state for help. After this, I think we can specifically turn to what happened with pandemic and gig work in India, specifically some of the challenges that arose with this kind of work. Gig work in India in the urban areas actually turned into a sponge of the last resort, which means that, as I mentioned, during the pandemic, various class livelihoods were badly hit. So there were more and more people searching for work and income during this period. And in the urban areas, gig work became a sponge for these kind of people. More and more people turn to this activity to generate income and work. It's very interesting because in the rural Indian context, it is agriculture that is considered to be this sort of sector. And now in the urban areas, it has become gig work. We saw that gig work was, some types of gig work were completely suspended, others were partially suspended during the national lockdown. Even in the post-lockdown period, there was a lack of demand, and the rates of payment as well as number of gigs were falling. In fact, this reduction of rates and gigs is also connected to the sponge of the last resort function. More and more people were coming in, resulting in less work and less payments. Here, I think we can take a second to actually really seriously question the myth of the idle assets that is associated with the platforms. So there is this interesting narrative in discussion of platforms that really what they're doing is that they're enabling idle assets that are just lying around to be put to better use. Okay, in the Indian context of platforms, we do not see that happening. In fact, in the Indian context, we actually saw that there were various arrangements through which, in fact, there were loan arrangements often through which these assets were put to work in the platforms. What do I mean? For instance, it's very unusual still for households or people to have cars or bikes just lying around idle. So when they wanted to come into gig work, they would often take loans to buy the car or buy the motorbike, and then start the work. In fact, in India, the platforms have been making various arrangements with banks and fintechs to enable this kind of debts as well. But we will also see that there were other kinds of debts that came into play. So really with the pandemic, what you see is that people who are already engaged in this gig work or who are seeking to enter gig work now have an increasing pile of debts that they have to pay back as well. Apart from that, specifically with the pandemic, we saw that there was an additional requirement of masks, sanitizing material, and vaccinations that were required from people working as part of this gig work. Okay. However, the intervention of the platform was very limited when it came to providing this kind of material. Gig workers also had to comply with, really it was like trying to get work done on a very shifting plane, which shifted on a daily basis or even more frequently than that. So how do you figure out all these different rules and conditions of work when the situation is so dynamic? That was a challenge they faced. Apart from that, this is something that we would have seen globally, that gig work really made urban life possible. When so many people were working from home, it was really the gig workers who were going out there and making that kind of work from home possible for us, which also meant that as essential workers, they were more exposed to COVID and other kinds of medical emergencies during this period. And we find that this was something that they had to engage with. There was limited assistance being given by platforms despite promises of insurance. Um, and so the question became, what did they do in that context, the gig workers? Um, Now I will turn to examining networks in the platform literature. And because our argument really is that when we look at platforms, there have been some interesting discussions on economic networks, but we need to go beyond the platform to understand how they are linked to the platform itself. So we see that there is a discussion on platforms as network infrastructures, where there are network effects, which means that the more people that join, the stronger the network effect. It will create robustness in the platform and also give the platform the capacity to be a monopoly or a monopsony. Okay. We have also seen literature which talks about the emergence of network cells and network assets and how these are monetized as part of platforms. Our intervention in this literature is coming from the way in which networks are being discussed. We see that there is a lot of focus on platform networks. For instance, there's a discussion on entrepreneurs, networks of engineers and architects, service providers, users or consumers. And gig workers have till date usually been considered as being embedded within these on-platform networks. However, we find that there are actually very few studies which consider how gig workers actually cross platform boundaries to do their work. There is actually some literature which has started to consider how gig workers actually maybe collaborate across platforms or manipulate across platforms to get work done, but really very less literature on these off-platform networks. So recently, thankfully, there is more literature. We found studies by Wood and Schwartz, which looked at off-platform exchanges, but these are still limited in scope. And it is our intention today to actually give you a snapshot of how these off-platform networks are working when it comes to gig work in India. Okay, and it is important to keep in mind that in these off-platform networks, the interaction could be online and it could be offline. That's something that we should keep in mind. So when we turn to the literature in economic sociology as well as Indian sociology, we see that there is actually a lot of discussion on economic networks. And I think it's time for these two literatures to speak, the literature broadly on platforms and the literature on economic sociology and Indian sociology. So from the latter, we know that some of the economic networks that have come into play in India are caste networks, village networks, and kinship networks. We also find that literature from the subcontinent shows us that there are specific networks that are really crucial for work. And here, I think we can also think about the network nature itself, right? So if you go back and look at social network analysis, for instance, what is the network characteristic? Basically, that there is exchange happening between various nodes of the network. And also there is something which ensures that this network exchange continues. So what are some of these factors which lead to the continuation of exchange on these networks? And we are arguing that when we look at these specific networks in the context of India, it is obligations and duties of mutual reciprocity very often that come into play. Okay, so in the context of India specifically, we are looking at networks such as, well, the family I think we can consider as an institution, but networks such as neighborhood networks, co-worker networks, as well as dispersed kinship networks that are coming into play. I'd also like to take a minute to point out that when we look at all of this in the context of the pandemic, it is not our contention that the pandemic has led to the generation of these off-platform networks. Instead, what we are arguing is that these off-platform networks have always propped up platforms, particularly gig work in India. However, the pandemic in some ways has made these platforms and the support it gives, these networks and the support they give to platforms much more visible. So we started off with a few basic questions. What kinds of monetary and non-monetary resources were gig workers searching for during the pandemic? And which economic networks and institutions did they draw upon for the same? So the presentation is based on a paper where we have conducted ethnographic study of gig work in two cities in India. One is Kanpur and Kolkata. Some of this happened because of the constraints placed on us by the pandemic itself. We looked at two different types of platforms, ride hailing and food delivery. The ride hailing platforms are called Ola and Uber, and the food delivery platforms are Swiggy and Zomato. Apart from the usual methods associated with ethnographies, we also did ride-alongs. And here I should clarify that Rajorshi did the ride-alongs. And if you have any more questions on the methods, we can talk more about it. One quick thing that I want you to consider when you're looking at the slide is that apart from people who were working in platforms or gig workers, we also spoke to related individuals. And soon I hope to show you why we spoke to those related individuals. So essentially, we are really looking at three economic networks and one institution when we're talking about gig work here. The institution is that of the household, and the networks are dispersed kinship, neighborhood networks, and workplace networks. So let us return to economic sociology for a little bit and go back to the discussion on what are called household economies by Swedberg. So Swedberg identifies the household as an important economic institution, and he goes back to the work of Ellickson to see how this can be defined. So household is a set of institutional arrangements, formal or informal, that govern relations among the owners and occupants of a particular dwelling space, where the occupants usually share meals and sleep. If you read the essay by Swedberg, and I'm sure Ellickson's book as well, one thing you will find is that households are actually really multifaceted. So for instance, the most common form of the household that you may be familiar with would be a family-based household, right? So in the family-based household, you are looking at people who live with each other, who share meals, and who are related to, crucially, who are related to each other through blood and or marriage. And there is a conjugal couple at the center. There could be non-family based households as well. So for instance, Swedberg speaks of, let's say temporary households that crop up when friends decide to share a household. Okay. Now, in the context of India, family-based households are actually large and multi-generational. There is a discussion in Swedberg's essay where there's a very, he says the average size of the modern household is 3 or 4 people. And that is very different in the case of India, where a typical household may be a mother-in-law, father-in-law, a mother and father, let's say they're 2 or 3 sons who are living with their spouse and children. So all of them would be living under one roof. And so all these different components that you see of the definition of the household up here on the screen, there's a lot of give and take and permutations and combinations of that happening in the Indian household. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. We also see that the household intersects with other forms. So for instance, it intersects with dispersed kinship networks. It also intersects with non-family networks, such as the neighborhood, as well as the co-worker network. So in the next few minutes, I will be primarily focusing on the family-based household. So just to quickly revisit Swedberg, Swedberg actually considers the work of Max Weber, who makes the argument that household-based economies were really a thing of the past, and now over time we have moved into a market economy, which Swedberg rejects and says if we actually consider the family-based firm, that is the most predominant form of the firm even to this date. Okay, so therefore clearly there are intersections between the market and the household economies, and that's one of the reasons why we are considering this as an important institution. This is also strongly supported by evidence from India. You can look at the work of Jan and Harris White from 2019. And especially this is the case if you try to actually have a slightly more expansive view of the firm. The firm is typically associated with a formal economy. In a country like India, for instance, where there is a huge informal economy or a shadow economy, what we are really talking about are entrepreneurial units that are centered around the household, particularly the family-based household. Okay. So one clarification here, when we are talking about household in the context of gig work, in both cities, we found mostly not mostly, all of them were patrilineal households. And also these specific sectors that we took up, which is ride hailing and food delivery gig work, these are the activities taken up by men. Okay. So the gig worker here is a man. So we saw that the gig worker often relied on other men in the patrilineal household in order to get his work done. For instance, there was a heavy dependence on the earning of the elder brother or any male cousins who are residing with them in the same household for the repayment of the loans that I had mentioned earlier. So one thing you have to consider is that in this kind of large Indian household that I'm talking about, it may be that there are people who have, let's say there may be two separate kitchens within the same roof. So one set of cousins and uncles and aunts eats together and they kind of contribute money for that. Another set may eat separately together, but all of that is happening under the same roof. All right. But by virtue of living in the same household, there are some important ties that still come into play at the level of the household. So we can give you the example of Satish, who's 33 and he was engaged in ride-hailing work. And he said that he had to take a loan to start doing the work, to get the bike or the car to do this work. And he said that it was actually his elder brother who paid his installments for 5 months so that he could start doing this work, right? And he said that my brother does not ask me to pay the money back, but once I have paid off the bank loan, I will actually start paying my brother back. The reason why I wanted you to think about this is because in the platform literature, typically when we are talking about assets, when we're talking about incomes, when we're talking about expenditure, we are looking at the figure of the individual. So I suppose some of that discussion on neoliberalism and the neoliberal subjectivity has really permeated the platform literature itself. However, when we look at the case of India, actually it is the household as a unit that we should be considering, specifically the family-based household. So we see, for instance, that during the pandemic, for some of these gig worker households, the only income that is coming into the household was the elderly father's pension or income, because both the gig worker as well as their spouse could not work. Earlier, this money used to be channeled into a stock of savings, and now this money is being used for medical emergencies. As I mentioned, platforms did make certain arrangements for, let's say, insurance, health insurance to be provided to gig workers. However, it is very complicated to access that kind of insurance for people. So while they were ill, as you may be familiar, we had a very bad bout of these two waves of COVID where there was sheer chaos and the kind of expenditure that was required. A lot of things had to be bought on the black market. So how do you even start to capture all of that in a formal relation of these kind of insurance. So that is where a lot of these kind of support was coming in. The patrilineal household was also significant because the men in this household played a very active role in mentorship and training, which means that for a gig worker who is starting out, how do you apply to get this work? How do you start to use the nested infrastructure of using the mobiles or the apps that are associated with platform work? How do you start to use vehicles? Which vehicle do you use? How do you negotiate the city? A lot of that training came from other men in the patrilineal household. We also see that there are instances of what Pier Giorgio, Brian, and I called co-use in a recent paper, where assets were being shared between people. So in our paper, we spoke about the shared use of devices, but in this context, it could be that it is the car or the bike that is being shared. Okay, we can give you the example of Irshad, who had started driving for Uber after the pandemic, and he really heavily relied on his son. So basically, Irshad and his son both are working for Uber. When the son is not using the car, Irshad is driving that car for Uber. And the son is the one here who's training the father. So the father is on the phone the whole time with the son, and he's trained even in basic things like how do you interact with the customer, how do you solicit a good rating from the customer. All of this training is really coming from the son. So these males in the patrilineal household become very important. In fact, across all the three networks that we consider today, both aspects, access, mentorship, and training, as well as co-use, these are constant things that we see across these networks. So although I said that most of the work is done by the men, of course, there is a significant role for the women as well in gig work. We found that networking by wives and the natal kin of the wives, which means that the gig workers' in-laws, was actually crucial for the gig worker to start doing this kind of work. So theoretically, of course, a person can try to sign up on, directly with the platform. But actually, in effect, we saw that people were tapping into all of these institutions and networks to start doing this kind of work. Apart from that, we also saw that it is through the in-laws that they got access to resources through which they could maintain their gig work. And again, we see the instance of co-use here. We take up two cases. One is Raktim, who used to work in a workshop and he lost his job because of the pandemic. And it is through his wife's contacts, his wife used to work as a domestic worker, who was in touch with a larger network of other domestic workers. And through them, the Raktim actually got introduced to other people working for food delivery, for this food delivery platform, Swiggy. So that is how he started doing this work. We can also take up the case of 20-year-old Atul, who was actually mentored by his brother-in-law, 34-year-old Nikhilesh, in order to start working for Ola. Atul and Nikhilesh, if I remember correctly, are also sharing the bike that is being used. So one person is using it for Ola, and the same bike is being used for Zomato. We also see that, again, going back to how these households and networks function, what keeps the interaction going is that there is this pattern of reciprocity and obligations that you can see in the household. So for instance, wives who worked outside of the household and earned an income, that income was supposed to be used for household expenses. We also saw the use of dowry to repay vehicle loans and medical emergencies. Um, it's very interesting that in the household, of course, we also see very clear cut, in fact, financial roles. It's the secret that everyone knows. Okay. So for instance, and this is something that I have actually written about in a paper on monetary digitization in Kanpur, we see that the wife is often supposed to have a secret stash of money saved up for a rainy day. So the characteristic of a good wife is to do this secretly and keep it secretly and just bring it out when the need arises. Okay. So we found that people, like mothers-in-law would get very angry if the daughter-in-law said, "I have not been saving." Okay. So that was a failure of their responsibility as a wife or a daughter-in-law. We also see very much, again, this is something that I looked at in my 2018 paper, maybe that's 2019, that the couple often shares the bank account and the gig worker husband does the work because there is money work associated with being on the platform and doing this gig work of accessing the ATM and the bank. Now, although we are talking about this in terms of clear-cut duties and obligations, there is also some kind of consultation happening, right? So for instance, Hari, a gig worker with Swiggy, says that he often consults his wife in taking financial decisions. So let's take a look at the role of these three networks now. So we start with the dispersed kinship network. Of course, the family-based household that we are speaking about is also part of this kinship network, but primarily we're talking about more spread out kin. Okay. Now this the gap between the household, the family-based household, and the larger kinship network is really a separation by degrees, very much. It could be that your kin live very far away in a different city, or they live back in the village, or it could be that your kin are really living in the same city, even in the same neighborhood. So it means that the 10 people living in the houses close to me are all related to me either by blood or by marriage. Okay, that was not an unusual arrangement at all. So in this part of the presentation, I'm going to be talking about this dispersed kinship network. People who are living in the same city or living in the village or a different urban center. So in the dispersed kinship network, we saw that gig workers were going back to the dispersed kinship network primarily to ask for non-monetary resources. They had to be very careful if they asked for monetary assistance from this network, okay? Because in this network, it is acceptable to ask for money only on specific occasions. So for instance, if there is a marriage in the family, then it is okay to ask your kin, okay? It is not okay to ask even your natal kin, which means that people you're related through your mother or father for money when you don't have work, or for money when you want to pay back your gig work loans. That is not considered to be good. And if you do that, then you'll get the tag of a nikamma or a good for nothing. We also see that the gig worker never sought monetary help from his wife's relations or his in-laws. In fact, in one case, we saw that the wife herself approached her natal kin to ask for money, and that became a huge social minefield. So both the gig worker and the wife are really discouraged from approaching the marital kin for monetary help. Okay. However, the larger dispersed kinship network does enable gig workers to come for non-monetary resources. Okay, so for instance, 40-year-old Shivam, who drives for a ride-hailing app called Ola, he actually had to leave the city of Kanpur and go back to the village because the city could not sustain him during the pandemic. And during that period, because there was a conflict with his own brother, he actually preferred to go and stay with a cousin, okay, his maternal cousin. It also helped that the maternal cousin was quite influential in the rural area and could help him get work, so 100 days of work, till the time that he was able to return back to Kanpur. So we also see that similar to the kinds of non-monetary assistance that people get in the household, even in the dispersed kinship network, we see that introduction to gig work, access to gig work, and training in how to actually navigate this very important and new field of work, all of that is coming from the kinship network. We also see that gig work is in India, it has physical dangers associated with it, and we can discuss this during the Q&A session. And in fact, the aspect of actually ensuring the safety of kin, okay, or having someone to look out for you, some of that actually came from this dispersed kinship network. For instance, Manoj recounted to us that he asked his 20-year-old cousin Joy to start working with Zomato because Joy's father's health deteriorated during this period and the family needed monetary assistance. So it was Manoj who actually spoke to Joy's mother and assured her that there will be someone to look after Joy and have his back as he's doing this work, and also that it's not going to interrupt his education. The second network that we look at is the network of neighborhood relations. Again, a very complex sort of field, and we can talk about the definition of the neighborhood. But in the areas that we covered as part of our study, the neighborhood was referred to as the locality. In Kolkata specifically, we could see that the locality could be mapped very closely to these centers of social interaction called clubs. And we are looking at different types of agents in the locality here or the neighborhood, which is the moneylender, locality residents, as well as neighborhood institutions. So who is the moneylender? The moneylender is a person who lends at an interest, and he has access to political patronage and or agricultural land, government job, and inheritance or additional business. This is we found actually a significant difference between the two cities when we considered the aspect of moneylenders. In Kanpur, locality level money lending is common. And in fact, gig workers borrowed heavily from locality level money lenders during the pandemic because they had these mounting debts. In Kolkata, on the other hand, of course, money lending happened, but it did not happen at the level of the locality. It happened at a broader scale. So therefore, in fact, these moneylenders were quite feared, and gig workers avoided approaching these moneylenders even during the pandemic. Now, as I mentioned, we see that this core unit, entrepreneurial unit of the household, the family-based household, intersects with these networks. And this is one such example. So we saw that in order to access the money lender, what was sought was that the gig worker should have reputational collateral. So in Kanpur, in order to approach a money lender, you should be able to show that you have something to deposit as security, basically mortgage something. And also the good reputation of the family-based household was essential. If the family-based household had a bad reputation in the neighborhood, then you would have to pay a higher interest rate or deposit a greater amount of collateral. Okay. In Kolkata, we found that since the scale at which lending operations occurred was larger than the locality, but the one thing you have to remember is that when we talk about money lenders, these are not formal banking institutions. They are informal relations of lending. So if I'm going to give you money, I need to know that I can trust you. And that trust often emerged in Kolkata with the figure of an intermediary. Someone would connect the gig worker who lived in various localities with the money lender who operated at a larger scale than the locality. And that someone very often used to be a person living in the same locality as the gig worker. So we found that locality residents provide both monetary as well as non-monetary resources. In the context of Kolkata, when we are talking about monetary resources, we are talking about non-interest loans. Okay, in Kanpur, it could be both non-interest as well as interest loans. Again, here the question of reputational capital became very, very significant. So whether or not a gig worker can get help in the locality for monetary or non-monetary resources depended on the reputation. Whose reputation? It is, of course, the reputation of the gig worker himself. He should be perceived as a friendly face. He should be seen to volunteer actively in locality events. So it could be religious functions, it could be state sponsored welfare events, etc. And secondly, the again the reputation of the family based household. So it is expected that, if you're coming from a reputable family, which means that you should have no defaults on prior loans, this is not a family that fights in public, and that the children display respect to elders in the locality. This is considered to be a reputable family, and then people will help you. Now, at the locality level, we saw that typically gig workers did not borrow money for routine expenditure, because borrowing money repeatedly for routine expenditure could give rise to conflict in the locality or loss of face. So we see that, as I mentioned, that there were people who migrated from rural areas to urban areas to work, right? So usually for various types of resources, whether it was monetary assistance or non-monetary assistance, gig workers would, if they were migrants, they would rely on people who had migrated from the same area back in various regions. So that would be their first, as it were, port of call for help. We also see that gig workers in the locality played a very active role again in onboarding new recruits to the platform. As we mentioned, gig workers turning into the resort, the kind of, the sponge or the last resort place to go for a job when you've lost your original job in the pandemic. And there, these kind of locality ties to get into the gig work or to get into the platform, this locality tie helped a lot. Okay. So we can take the example of Mahanta, who is a Zomato worker. Zomato is a food delivery platform in India. And he said that, he actually helped someone living in his locality called Kuddu to enter into another food delivery platform, which is Swiggy. Okay, so Guddu said, I needed money as my mother, who was earning from being a domestic worker, lost her job and couldn't support the family. So this is where Mahanta, who is a locality resident, came to help Guddu. And in fact, again, between the two people, we saw that there was co-use as well. In this specific instance, we can actually, in fact, go ahead and refine what we mean by co-use. So co-use here means assets attached to platforms, that is either the bike or the car. And at the neighborhood level, this could mean two things. Either you are renting an asset to a locality resident, and that is happening on the basis of exchange of money, or it could be that there is non-monetized sharing of this asset with club members. So for instance, Mahanta and Guddu were part of the same social neighborhood social club, and they would play carom together. And it is through those links that they actually decided to share the bike for Zomato and Swiggy work. Again, going back to relations of debt, we saw that at the neighborhood level, in contrast to Kolkata, we see that in Kanpur, borrowing happens in a very hierarchical way. So questions of caste-based status really come into question in Kanpur. Again, I want to clarify, as we are discussing these structures as well as these networks, I want to go back to something that Swedberg mentioned in his analysis of the household. He said, by no means is the household a happy institution. It's not like everything is perfect there. These are very much institutions where there is hierarchy, where there is inequality, but there are also questions of reciprocity and duties and obligations. So I think we should keep that in mind as we are discussing these networks. So we take the example of Bimal, who is a 30-year-old driving for Ola, which is a ride-hailing platform. And Bimal, during the pandemic, actually gave out non-interest loans to others in the locality, including other gig workers who lived in his locality. So Bimal has a very interesting way of describing who he's willing to give the loan to, right? So he said, we as a community came together during the pandemic, and the ones who stayed away from initiatives such as distributing ration or distributing masks, they are really people that we refer to as selfish locals. Okay. So he says that he is not willing to give or lend money to people who are so selfish, because he thinks that these are bad borrowers. And here, bear in mind that Bimal is actually giving out non-interest loans to people in the locality. We also saw that at the locality level, there were actually a couple of different interventions that we should quickly discuss. So during this period, as I said, while a lot of people are working from home, it was gig workers who were really going out into the streets, making this work from home possible. What happened was that gig workers were identified as super spreaders of the virus. So therefore, there was a lot of pressure and push to get gig workers vaccinated. We saw very little initiative coming from the platforms themselves when it came to vaccinations. There was a real fear or let's say an anxiety amongst platform workers that if they don't get themselves vaccinated, they will not be allowed to work for the platforms. But the platform was not doing anything to facilitate vaccination. Okay, so there was the effort that was coming from the state and also other informal ties that people relied on to get vaccinations so that they could continue doing gig work. Okay. And in fact, very often that kind of act, because vaccines were, as you may well know, quite scarce in India, in various urban areas. And so it was through neighborhood ties that some gig workers were able to access vaccinations. So for instance, Mr. Nath, who is a councillor in the Kolkata Municipal Corporation, claims that, we got 19 cab workers, by this he means gig workers, vaccinated last month in a single day, and they were all from the same ward. So the person connecting the gig worker to the councillor who's enabling all of this is often a locality tie. Apart from that, we also see that there are neighborhood institutions that came into the picture. So for instance, there were religious institutions such as the neighborhood masjid or the gurudwara, uh, which actually distributed either cooked food or rations pretty regularly. And that is what sustained gig workers' families in the locality. And in fact, this was distributed irrespective of the religious affiliations of the receiving gig workers. Apart from that, there were also other charitable institutions that were at play here. For instance, they were instrumental in distributing masks and sanitizers. And again, this is, so from the platform's perspective, the requirement was placed on gig workers saying, make sure that you're masked and you use sanitizers. But where were they to turn to for these masks and sanitizers and vaccines? This is where the locality ties came in. The third and final network that we will consider is that of the workplace and co-worker relations. Now, the usual perception of a gig worker particularly is that these are free floating agents who are kind of, distributed across the city engaged in gig work. However, we have seen through these studies that actually they have very spatially embedded relationships. And in fact, they also congregate at specific places. So for instance, this image, which unfortunately is not from our field, but it's an image from a newspaper article, it shows you people who work for, these are gig workers who work for Swiggy, and they're sitting and waiting outside. You can see a row of closed shops, right? But essentially, this is the place they used to congregate and wait for orders to come in. So the restaurant would get in touch with them and they would go and pick it up and go and deliver. Okay, so these kind of spatialized connections really came into play. There were also other spatialized connections that I will quickly walk you through. So when we look at co-worker relations, we are really looking at multiple networks. And here an important trust group is the one where there is a spatialized connection with others. So for instance, people who have circle relations with others working for the same platform, such as Swiggy and Zomato, or when you look at the ride-hailing apps such as Ola and Uber, people who have ties through locality or renting assets from the same person. Previously, in the platform literature in India itself, there have been some studies which have looked at the emergence of fictive kinship between co-workers and how that was actually very crucial in providing mentorship and training. But I'm hoping that we will get to see more of this kind of literature as we go as time goes by. So during the pandemic, we saw that co-workers actually played a vital role in the creation of informal networks. In fact, this is the topic of a paper that Rajoshi and I are working on with Sriram Venkatraman, where really, I think for most people, when they think of these kind of informal networks, they may think that these are simply friendship networks. But here we see a very complex circuit of exchange happening between these informal networks. And this exchange happens both online and offline. So on these off-platform informal networks, we see that ride details are being shared, or information of where to seek economic help is being shared, or other kinds of work opportunities are being shared. We are hoping to capture in that paper the degree and quantity of and quality of the kinds of things that circulate in these networks. But these are also very crucial economic networks. So as we mentioned, vital information like location or documents or COVID protocol or information regarding vaccination were also passed on to through these networks, onto gig workers through these networks. Very interestingly, we also saw that some gig workers actually relied on previous networks that they had created through histories of employment. So, for instance, some people turned to their ex-employers for assistance. Here we have the case of Ganesh, who drives for Uber and Zomato Go. Uber Go and Zomato, who actually said that he used to drive for a doctor in the city, and the doctor moved away during the pandemic, and he gifted a scooter to Ganesh. And that is how Ganesh was able to start doing this work. And again, this is not being extended as a loan. There's no repayment expected here. A very, very important figure when we are talking about these workplace relations is the figure of the Gadi Malik. Okay? Now, very interestingly, in the literature on the platforms, you will see that there is a lot of discussion on how platforms themselves are engaged in rentier capitalism. However, when we look at some of these off-platform networks, we see how these platforms are actually tapping into and propped up by indigenous rentier networks. Okay, and the Gadi Malik is one such figure, a node in this network. The Gadi Malik is a person who owns the car, but he rents the car out for someone else to drive. Okay, and the link between the Gadi Malik and the gig worker is one of patronage and reciprocity. So, for instance, the Gadi Malik, who himself may be quite indebted because he may have taken that car on the loan. So, he's the owner of the asset, but at the same time, quite indebted. He actually went on during the pandemic to provide non monetary help, such as give food grains or access to internet for children's education and medicine. So, we've shown here on the side the case of Rajneesh, whose daughter goes to the Gadi Malik's house because she can access the internet there for her studies. And incidentally, she also had her midday meal at the Gadi Malik's house. We also see that gig workers who had to return to the village because they were not getting enough to sustain their life in the city. When they left, they gave the recommendations for a substitute who would come in and do this kind of renting from the Gadi Malik. Now, this choice was, of course, reciprocity, but also, basically the person was going to drive the vehicle till they returned from the village. It was also strategic because they hoped that if they got someone that they knew, that they would not drive up the rate at which the rent is being paid for the vehicle. Finally, we also see the way in which the household comes back into the discussion, even when we talk about co-workers. So here we take a look at cohabiting people who, gig workers who are living with each other. Okay, so in both cities, in Kolkata and Kanpur, we found that migrants used to stay together on a sharing basis. Here, gig workers would share with other gig workers as well as non-gig work drivers. They were all migrants to the city. Now, during the pandemic, very few people were being able to pay their share of the rent. So it helped that they stayed in this kind of arrangement because at least for a few days, a buffer was provided. So even if I did not earn today, I may actually have a roof over my head. But of course, this was quite limited because uh, everyone in the sector knew that there was tremendous distress. So they would not hang around for an extended period in this location where people were living. If they could not pay the rent, then they would, after maybe 10 or 15 days, they would leave themselves. So again, these kind of household relations between the co-workers, the gig workers specifically, was very significant because a lot of information and co-use happened as part of these networks. Okay. And the point to note here is that rather than being simply altruistic, these forms of sharing are strategic. Okay, so which means that you get to ensure that your common living space is maintained. So if 5 or 10 people are sharing the house, and 8 people are not able to pay, you may just end up not having the spot at all, even though you can pay, right? And secondly, they wanted to kind of have the same people stay so that you would not have new people coming in, because when new people came in, they may actually drive up the rate at which the shared vehicle was being rented. Okay, the one thing to keep in mind is that often the the these people came together and shared the household based on if they knew each other from renting the vehicle from the same person. That is the connection. So very quickly, I wanted to show on the screen these three networks and the institution, and what kind of resources gig workers were getting from the institution and the networks. So as you can see, they're both monetary as well as non-monetary. So to end, I think we can go back and look at the literature that says that as part of the broader neoliberal framework of service work, and specifically in the context of the platforms of work on platforms, there is this neoliberal subjectivity which is very strong. So it is considered to be the individual's responsibility to cope with any state of exception. However, what our study finds is that while those individual strategies may be visible, what is backing or supporting those individual strategies? It is that people are relying on personal and often off-platform networks for this. Okay, so therefore, this institution of the household and the three networks was really crucial. And we want to clarify that it's not as if the personal off-platform networks are the solution to the problems created by the pandemic, but these are very significant infrastructures of the last resort. They have been supporting platform work for a very long time in India, and they became even more important during this crisis generated by the pandemic. Thank you.
First is that if there are any differences of gig workers in terms of age, or and if there are any differences of gig workers in terms of neighborhood. Suppose if person belongs to Ripon Street, or if person belongs to Picnic Garden, if there will be any differences
Mhm.
how they're accessing to the platform.
Yes,
Thank you.
absolutely. Of course. Thank you, Brian, for those questions. There were differences in terms of age, but what we also saw was that with the pandemic, as people started losing their jobs, we had people who were maybe not, if the difference in age that we saw was between platforms. So there was a certain group which was doing the food delivery work, and it was in the ride hailing work where we saw more of a variation in terms of age group. But with the pandemic, even older people who had been engaged, and then we took the case of the person, the 51-year-old who started to drive the cab, right? So I think more and more people started to take up different kind of gig work. So that is certainly something that would be interesting to trace over time a little bit, those variations in age. As far as locality is concerned, I think because, as you could have probably seen, there was such a mix of the kinds of, work that people were doing, which meant that even though I may be doing Zomato work, I know people who are working for Swiggy, or I may know people who are working for even the ride hailing apps, right? So I think through the locality connections, um, some of those distinctions may have become more muddy than become crystallized by neighborhood. That is what I anticipate. Other clarifications or questions?
Hi, ma'am. Thank you
Hi,
for your
Aditya.
presentation. I was wondering if there were any kind of residential segregation of gig workers, or were they scattered around Kolkata or Kanpur, ma'am? Like, is that like kind of uh, digital segregation only among the gig workers, or like were there physical segregation?
Segregation, do you mean segregation amongst people who work for different platforms, or do you mean concentration of residences of gig workers?
This concentration of gig workers, ma'am, in a
Yes.
like same residential area.
Yeah, of course, the specifically this kind of work, which is gig work, is very much class-based, right? So you do not have people who are upper class or even middle class who are taking up this kind of work. So by that virtue itself, I mean, and we know that Indian cities are, you do have this kind of a, segregation by class or even by caste. So we would see, of course, that kind of concentration of gig workers in certain neighborhoods. So for instance, in Kanpur, if I went to civil lines, I'm not going to find a lot of, which is a posh area, I'm not going to find gig workers there living there, right?
Thank you.
Was there a follow-up question? You can go ahead and ask that.
Like I just want like kind of exploring like what is through ethical or racial lines. Is there any kind of segregation in gig works? Like any specific caste is like.
I mean, yeah, of course, you could think of caste, but I think, caste, of course, is one of those institutions which we saw occurring across these platforms. Okay. But I think the form was really complex. So, for instance, we mentioned that in Kanpur, when you're taking a loan, if you're a higher caste person, you're not going to take a loan from someone who is of a lower ranking caste. Okay, so caste worked in that way. Looking for spatial segregation may not necessarily be the most optimum prism to look for the way in which caste intervenes as an institution in this kind of work. It is there, but not necessarily as spatial segregation.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay.
Hi, ma'am. First
Hi,
of all,
Arunima.
thanks for the wonderful presentation. I actually wanted to ask because, especially because of COVID-19 and before that also, we have been shifting to digital platforms so much, and we hear a lot of things about the cybercrime, identity theft, and things like that. So if something like that happens to an Ola or an Uber driver, so is there a system or something in place by the platforms which can support these Ola Uber drivers rather than pitching it specifically on them that okay, maybe it's their fault, the company has nothing to do.
Yeah, we saw some of those. Thank you, Arnima. That's such a great question. We saw some of those instances all through the pandemic. I'm sure that you saw these reports where a customer attacked. I think it was a Zomato worker, if I remember correctly, right?
Yeah.
Or in various kinds of situations, there was risk to platform workers. However, I mean gig workers. The platforms, of course, to a certain extent, they will provide an infrastructure. So for instance, they can say, here you call this service center and you figure out, what to do in this kind of situation. But that is such a convoluted process and it may have limited help where you're actually at the end of the day, when you're calling someone, that person is not in the same location as you. They may not be able to understand what is going on. So they are located in a completely different city. And in a country like India, I'm sure you're aware, there are such huge linguistic variations here, right? So very often they would actually rely on people who are their co-workers instead, because there is that personal connection with them. And these co-worker networks are so robust and fascinating, actually. And as you saw also, the dispersed kinship network is coming into play. That's one of the reasons perhaps, because there is that personal touch there also close by, that they turn to these networks rather than that call center far away.
I actually met an Ola driver yesterday, only, who told me that he shifted from Uber to Ola because of something like this happened to him. Because his account was hacked by somebody, and the whole history was deleted for like past 2.5 years or something. Since then, this question has been there in my mind, and then right also.
Yeah, I think, so cybercrime, no, actually, that will be so interesting to trace because, of course, just related to also Pierre's question, we are getting this kind of encouragement / push to become digitized, to use platforms, which leave us vulnerable in very, very significant ways. And what do you turn to when there is this kind of a problem? I think that most of the gig workers are going to turn to, rather than the platform itself, because it's an impersonal infrastructure that you're negotiating with there. You may turn to your co-worker networks or kin networks, and if you can't figure the problem out, then we have this kind of a situation that you're reporting. But thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you, Ansa.
Okay, I think time is up.
Yes, sorry, I think I
Don't worry, don't
I
worry.
ran into it.
Thank you for your excellent presentation. Meanwhile, I think that the room,
So what,
let me stop recording.